All right. Well, we're almost there. If you haven't already, please just send me a chat real quick for attendance purposes. I guess we should get started. Let me, I'm going to share today's agenda with you and then we'll get started right away. So let's do, nope, hang on. I know I can do this. There we go. Okay, so today we're going to shift gears a little bit, certainly from what I thought was going to happen and from what we've done in the past. We had a steering committee meeting a few days ago, and in that meeting, we decided a few things. One of them is that, and I've heard this from others of you as well, that we're really going to focus on what you need to start the year. What materials do you need? What strategies do you need to launch this thing in the fall and be comfortable with it? And that means shifting away from all the things that I would normally have you writing about and thinking about, and making those things optional, basically. If you want to dive into them, you can, but making sure we're covering the essential, the bases. I'll talk about that in just a second. We're going to do another thing we decided was instead of having you get into breakout groups for 15 or 20 minutes to talk about what you read, we're just going to do a whole group Q&A session where if there are things about it that you want to talk about or you're questioning how it fits with your life, we'll do that as a whole group and hopefully streamline how much time we spend on the readings that you did for today. We will, in fact, critique the work that you did for today about, homework 3A, making sure that you are making the work metacognitive. And then we're going to spend an extended period of time with you doing the work for next week. Because several people have talked about how that would be useful to be able to do while we have time together, rather than treating it as straight homework. And then I'll introduce it next week's contract. So here's what I think everybody should know before we're done with the 6 weeks. We've already talked about the first couple, that making student work more, requiring students to become metacognitive as they're doing their work. It can take lots of shapes, as we'll find out, and we'll talk about that some more today. That you create structures that will really cause kids to do a lot of teaching and learning with each other, collaborative learning, that you learn how to do differentiation more effectively using the structure that I'm going to present to you, or that you already read about, and that we're going to work on how to adapt. And finally, I think the final thing that's really essential for everybody is really figuring out some of the many forms of students self-evaluating and building that into the structure. Most of these don't cost much on your part. There's not a lot of overhead. Reframing the student work, I think, is the biggest chunk of what you have to do to prepare. But a lot of these other things are setting things in motion that they're doing the work. The self-evaluation is a perfect example. You have to create structures for them to evaluate themselves, but then they're doing the work. And instead of you evaluating them and handing out points, they're doing it and internalizing that process. So we're going to focus on those 4 things as essential. We're going to come back and revisit them, make sure you guys are feeling comfortable with the work you've done. And then I want to expose you to everything. In a way, this is kind of what I'm recommending you do in your own classes, that everybody should see everything. But what you do depends on what you're capable of doing, what you want to do. So there's an essential chunk that everybody should do and master. But then there's a bunch of other stuff that you could try it, you could not try it. That's kind of what should be happening in classrooms, I think. And what we consider essential curriculum is really a subset of the whole curriculum, making everybody, pretending everybody's going to master all of it doesn't do anybody any good. And it does a lot of harm in the world. So we're going to kind of model that in what we do this week and the next 3 weeks after this. So let me stop that. Any questions about that at all? Any responses to that in terms of what we're going to be doing? Yes, ma'am. Your sound is off. Tawana, your sound is off. Uh-oh, she doesn't hear me. Ask to unmute. Oh, I have a button.
You're muted.
Yeah. She's still not hearing me.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
There we go. Okay, we didn't catch any of that.
Okay.
Start over.
I have tabs open and I was trying to close tabs out and then I couldn't get to your faces, which I still haven't figured that out. Okay, wait.
Okay.
Okay, but I just wanted to say really quick, I just wanted to say thank you because I feel like as the facilitator of this work, I do feel like you really did give us a platform to like, you know, just share like how we learn best and things like that. And I feel like that you modeled how to be adaptive as an instructor. And I know like sometimes as teachers, it's hard like to make shifts, especially if it's kind of like if you have one way of doing it. So I just wanted to commend you for like your willingness to like, you know, give us a voice and, you know, and elevate that and, you know, really like incorporate teacher voices into this. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's kind of you to say. I can't tell you how powerful it is. You know, I had this experience a number of times where I'd be looking at the classroom and you know how you can tell when they're not there, you know, they're checked out. And I would stop every now and then say something like, well, this is clearly not working. So let's do something different. Or I think you guys are bored. It looks to me like you're bored. And the truth is I'm starting to get bored. So let's do something different. And it's amazing how powerful it is that they realize that you're paying attention to what they're experiencing. Because a lot of times we get so busy with our lesson plans that we kind of run roughshod over who they are and what they're experiencing. So it's the least I could do to try to do that here as well. And a number of you have been very clear about expressing how we're using our time isn't suiting your needs. So I would be hypocritical not to respond. So thank you. Anyway, one other idea that we had, actually it was my idea and then we talked about it in the steering committee meeting, is the idea of all of you contributing something to the functioning of this group. In my own classes, I had what I called classroom contributions. And everybody in the room had to take on something to do that improves the well-being of the whole group. So being on a steering committee was one of those things. It was a major one, actually. But there were other people who would maintain the library of books and articles I had, or other people would help me with setting up or taking down you know, labs that I'd set up. Other people would water the plants. You know, I mean, you can come up with a long list of possible things. And so I would like to suggest that all of you, as part of your grade for this workshop, take on something that will improve all of our experience. So let me give you an example of what that might be, and then you can decide for yourself. So if you can contribute at least once in the next 3 weeks to jumping in on a steering committee, that would be a contribution. If you have something to say about how the thing is unfolding and or things that you need or you know other people are telling you they need, then help steer it. I need still some IT help from anybody who's better at Zoom than I am, which is not hard. I have not been able to, for instance, figure out how to put you into school-based groups. um, ahead of the next session. So today, unless somebody can tell me how to do that very quickly, we're still going to do random breakout groups. But I'm hoping that by next week, we'll be able to do that by school. If you can mentor or collaborate outside of what we're doing in these sessions, that would be a contribution. So if somebody, for instance, if somebody misses a session or part of a session, if you could get together with them and walk through what happened for the rest of that session, and I could give you my lesson plan if somebody needs that, then that would be a contribution for those people who are missing. We have a number of people who are going to miss parts of or whole sessions. Help them out. You could volunteer to be a breakout group team leader. So if we end up in schools, then you would be the school group leader. I'm going to ask you on occasion from now on to present what you're doing so that we can critique it together. It's one thing to critique in a small group, but I would like to model for you how to do that. And so if people can step up and say, sure, take mine, let's run with it, that would be useful, and that would be a contribution, or anything else that you can come up with as a contribution. Or not. I mean, this is voluntary, but this could be something that you implement in your own classes to help it, first of all, cultivate a sense of ownership and belonging among the people who are in the group, but also to help you out, to save your time by having somebody else do something that you would otherwise have had to do. So that's another little bit. And at the end of the last workshop, I'm going to have you give yourself a grade, because we'll be putting together strategies for doing that. And your workshop contribution will be part of that grade. So, okay.
Sorry, do you have a question about the homework and regarding to the reading? Is that okay to ask now?
Well, we're going to be going through the reading in just a second, so if you could hang on to it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd say let's hang on to it. I think, or you know what? Let's just go ahead and jump into that. Let's see, Q&A. Let's see. Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about. So it was Valentina, right? You had the question.
Mine's actually, I'm sorry, I should say, is a concern. First of all, when I was doing all these things, I really liked, especially last week's homework, because it actually geared to my needs, and I got to see my peers and what I need to tweak. And I understand these are things that we're going to do that we're going to tweak as we go along. Because we can create something, and the second we give it to a student, we're like, okay, this is what we need to change. So my concern is, after reading 5 and 6, I really enjoyed all the learning contracts. For it to be really meaningful, I feel that one I create even for the homework, I don't think would be like what I want, because when I looked at the sections where the students can choose from beyond and what they need to practice, I feel right now, because I don't have my material, I don't have my stuff in front of me, they're in my classroom. Yeah. I feel that part for me, it's like it's like having the scope and sequence there, but not the nitty gritty that, okay, now pick from these. Like the one with the quiz, which I really liked, where for each question, you actually had an example for them to do, but really, unless I'm in my classroom and I don't want to reinvent something that I might like. So that was my only concern, that doing this contract, the learning contract, is that it might not be complete, because I really want to I want to access my material in class. Right. Does that make sense? So that was my only concern with that.
That's a great point. Obviously, there are a lot of materials that most of you, if not all of you, just don't have access to right now. Maybe you've got some stuff on your computer, maybe it's all in files or on your computer at school, and that's fine. What we're trying to accomplish here is for you to create the scaffolding that you need so that on the first day of school, you're ready to go. So what you can do right now, without access to all your files and all the work and so forth, is to make decisions about what kind of structure you're going to use. For instance, there's a whole gallery of mini contracts, and you found one that you liked with a
Yep.
test assessment or something. Would you use it exactly like that, or would you tweak it for your students? Those are the kinds of things you should be thinking about. Remember, you're doing this work for yourself, not for me. I'll look at it, I'll give you feedback if I can, but the truth is, you're the ones who are creating things that you will use. And so whatever you do towards that goal is great. And if you can't do anything more specific, because you don't know what the questions on a quiz are and what would be attached to it, as long as you have a good sense of how you would do that, so that the last 2 weeks before school starts, you can start doing that for the first, 3 weeks of school, and then just try and stay ahead. That's great. So it's whatever works for you with the limited resources you have. Some of you have textbooks to read, some of you don't. We do what we can. And again, you're not doing this for me. I'm doing this for you, right? So other issues about what you read. Let's get back to just the ungraded feedback section. I want to maybe take that on first. I can't tell you how important I think this is. I don't know much about you, as I've said, and I don't know how big a part of your practice ungraded feedback is. So let me just get a sense of that. I'd like to have everybody do a fist to 5 thing, where 5 means I use ungraded feedback, just information going from me to you, you to me, you to yourself, you to your peers. Any way that we're giving each other information about where we are. I do that all the time, multiple times every day with every class. That would be a 5. A 3 means, yeah, sometimes that happens, not as much as I'd like. And a 1 means I have never done this before in my life. Okay? So everybody do a 1 to 5. Where are you in terms of ungraded feedback? How often is that part of your daily life? I see 3s, 4s, and 5s. Okay, look around. That's where we're at. That's great. Why don't we spend a little time right now with you sharing out some of the things, those of you who did 3s or 4s or 5s, maybe toss out an idea of some way that you do it, some technique you've got. Who sends the feedback? Who's receiving the feedback? Is it you to them? Is it them to you? Is it them to each other? What does it look like? Is it written? Is it oral? Is it a green or a red card they hold up? Is it a whiteboard that you write something on? Let's just start throwing some ideas out there of things that you do so we can all hear a little bit from each other. I think there's a wealth of information here. Let's start sharing.
I know, like, I like to move around. I think a lot of us, like, it's so different from how it was when I was a kid, because, like, I just remember the teachers kind of like just sitting behind the desk. And I feel like nowadays it's so different, because when I have gotten opportunities to look in other classrooms, you typically see like that you can't find the teacher, like, where's the teacher at? Because they're somewhere like blending in with the students. And so I also like to do the same thing and like move around the classroom. And so I feel like by being like mobile, I feel like I can like constantly go around the room. It can be something as little as like, so the kids are allowed to do like table graffiti in my room, where they can kind of like use the dry erase markers to write on the table to like just lay out their thoughts. And so sometimes I may not even like, it may not be for a grade, but I might just like tap something, like tap a part of their work just to like call their attention to that work, like, hey, notice this. Or sometimes like they might receive things that are highlighted to show them like, you know, this is accurate. And then the stuff that's not highlighted, they know, okay, something is missing here, but they don't know specifically what it is. And so that like naturally pushes the kids to like talk to somebody else and say, hey, did you get this highlighted? If so, like, I wonder why you got it highlighted and I didn't. And then they work together to try to figure out like what's the missing piece there. But
So
I don't, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So that's
Okay, let me,
I
let me
just have a question before you, because I want to ask you before you move on. That would be work that you're looking at and giving back to them, and you'll highlight the things that they have done well or that they got right or whatever, and they then know that there's something that they have to pay attention to. Is that it? Excellent. Okay. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Fire away.
my only thing though, I was gonna say, like, I feel like the one thing that prevents me from like putting myself like at a 5 is because I don't think that I've yet gotten to the point where I provide feedback in an equitable manner. And the reason why I say that is because I feel like some students are more inclined to like kind of like they're more like they're more open to like the teacher proximity, whereas some students are not like as open to that. And so I feel like so I feel like depending on the student's personality, sometimes it's easier to like, I feel like establish that rapport where you have that ongoing dialogue, or you might feel like you're providing feedback to certain students more than you do to other students.
Yeah.
And so I feel like my inclination is usually kids who are a little bit more extroverted tend to like kind of like initiate that dialogue sometimes. And so I feel like I have to be better about making sure that I'm like providing feedback in an equitable manner to all my students. That's what I feel like my work is still needed in that area.
Right, right. And one thing is, if you're not getting responses from everybody, to have them put it in writing and give it to you, then everybody gives you feedback. So, you know, if you're waiting for somebody to say something, you might wait a long time. If they're just going to write a sentence, then that, you know, that might, you get something from everybody that way. Other folks, what do you got?
So
Yeah.
one thing I was just questioning, and this kind of goes along with what Tumon was just saying, that sometimes my students are, if I give feedback, they're like, do I have to fix it? Or they'll be like, you know, that internal motivation isn't there yet. And I don't want to have to continue. I'm trying to build that in my classroom. Again, special education is where I'm at. So it's a little bit different in terms of, to an extent, but it's that, like, if they constantly give me feedback, sometimes they're like, well, I read this already. And for them, sometimes if you read it again, it is laborious because they do have difficulties in certain things. And so like, it's, I don't know, I find it really hard sometimes with their internal motivation to be like, if I did give you feedback or this is something wrong, they just like, really, do I have to do it again? And I don't want to like, or like try something else that's similar. So I think that's just something that I personally am interested in anybody else having different ideas on how they've combat that, especially in like a smaller knit group where like I differentiate, but I'm really differentiating depending on the needs.
Yeah.
So
I'm special ed. So I'm just curious, what level do you do? Like, are you at King Lab right now?
no, I'm at Nichols.
Oh, you're at Nichols. Okay. So what do you have basically just the ones with the learning disabilities, or are your students more impaired than that?
No, it's, you name it, we've got
Just
it.
garden variety. Okay. So what I normally do is, yes, my students totally lack motivation to even do it the first time sometimes. So I just try to make it a game. I try to sit with them in a group and just like, okay, you guys, what are you going to do next? Okay. And so I try to lead them through every single thing because they cannot do everything on their own yet. So I try to model it by asking questions. Okay, what do you think you should do next? Okay, did you check out your notes? And so, yeah, I kind of have to lead them through every way, but I hope with the way that I am leading through it, I'm teaching them how to do it. So they're going to be able to do it themselves. Because next time I'll come back around and say, okay, well, what did we do the other day? What did we do when we did this problem? Sometimes they remember, sometimes they don't. But at least the students I work with now, even the ones that aren't special ed, they simply don't have the initiative for whatever reason. Maybe they do, but they just are afraid to do it, and because they'll make a mistake. But yeah, I do have to lead them through it, and to have them look at it and say, okay, well, what did you do? What's different with this one? Why is this one so good? So I constantly am asking them questions so they can look at what they're doing and try to figure it out for themselves. But yeah, they need guidance.
Yeah, it's like the task analysis. Like we're like breaking down for them as we talk to them, but we've gotten so many like more students with you know, like that don't do well in the co-teaching environment. So like they don't even want our help. They don't want to be talked to. They didn't want that extra
Oh, yeah.
attention. So that's like the tricky part. I mean, I worked in a small group last year for Number Worlds with a 7th grader. She did really well. We did the hand signals because she was super quiet. So I found that to be helpful, like after the warm up. But
did they end up like self-motivating? So like, I know after reading the reading, that was a big part of building the new environment and building that classroom environment, is that like them becoming independent,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, you guys, when I read it, I can say it. But you know, I think it depends on the type of students, but for those that have been like put down so many times, or like have like, you know, they're in those classrooms and they're constantly getting that feedback and that feedback and that feedback, and they're the only ones that are getting that feedback of like, you should check this, you know, on how to like really build that up in a more scaffolded way than necessarily like a checklist, a differentiated checklist, I guess.
Yeah. A bunch of ideas were crossing my mind as you guys were talking. One is to the culture is everything. I mean, the culture is everything. If they have a sense of belonging with a study group that they live with and work with, and they really trust each other and they're loyal to each other, things they won't do for you. So if a student gets on his highlighted bit and there's some stuff that's not highlighted, that back where they happen here.
You're breaking up a
and
lot.
They're willing to do that, they get engaged with trying to address other will never happen, especially if they're kids who are struggling in school, who tired of being picked or corrected.
Hi, Larry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we can barely hear you. You're breaking up a lot.
Oh, is that true for everybody?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm glad for the feedback. I'm wondering if I'm blocking. I have papers here, and I might be blocking the microphone. Okay. Well, we'll try that. Is that still okay?
That's better.
Okay. So, so loyalty and a sense of camaraderie and a sense of shared purpose is a huge part of resolving that. Another is having structural feedback, so it's not personal and it directs them to do something through the structure. So one kind of structural feedback is the helpful hints. If a kid turns it over and looks at it, they know they have to keep working and they probably should do another set of problems. That doesn't mean they're going to. But other kinds of structural feedback, I'm trying to think of an example where there's an automatic lead into, well, a mini contract that's based on a quiz they just took. I got this one right, this one right, this one wrong, and if I got this one wrong, I should do that work. Nobody's telling them what to do. It's just built in. That's how we do it here. So I don't know if that's helping, but yeah, that's a couple thoughts.
Something that I've done in my class about feedback, I haven't graded a quiz in my class in 5 years. I switched to standards-based grading, and part of that was I was just going to use quizzes as feedback tools. And definitely like the first couple of quizzes, like they always ask me for their score. And then I take a whole day, usually a whole class period or half a class period, and it's built in where they then sit in groups wherever they want, work with somebody, and they have to make the corrections on the quiz. They don't get any points for it. It doesn't bump up their grade. It doesn't do anything for them, but it's just that day's classwork. And that's what they do. Sometimes I'll assign it for homework, like you have to go back and fix it, but I like when they work together on the problems instead. But I've been doing that for 5 years, and after a while they get used to it.
So what you're saying is you don't have quiz grades as part of their quiz scores as part of their grade.
Correct. It doesn't. I just give them written feedback, and then they make corrections, and then I grade the unit test. So they should be using quizzes
to tell them what they don't know. We use them as practice. And then eventually at the unit test, that's when they have to have worked through all of the quizzes, corrected everything to help them understand it. And then hopefully that turns out beneficially on the unit test. So that finally gets graded.
That's great.
But I still do struggle with the motivation piece, like everyone else is saying. Like, it's not like my classroom runs super efficient and they get their quiz and they're super excited about making these corrections or having to make these corrections. And some end up starting to do it and feel fine about it. We all have those students, but we all also have the other students where like, it doesn't matter, you know, as long, if it's not a grade and it's not going to give them a point, you know, why are they going to invest the time? So it is challenging still, and I'm not really quite sure how to build in that motivation.
But that's where the issue of having a common purpose is everything. If we're all in this together and our purpose is for everybody to do well at this and also to grow as human beings, and if the kids buy into that, then these issues of motivation really do tend to become less prevalent. I actually have a video. I was going to show this to you later, but I think maybe I'll interrupt what we're doing right now. And I want to go to my my website, and I wasn't actually prepared for this now that I'm thinking about it, but if you guys could just hold on for a second, I just want to show you something about the motivation issue. This is something that, hang on just a second, something that I did with some math classes, and these are all freshmen, by the way, at Palatine High School. So let me just get this set up, and I will actually, so let me do this. I'm going to share the screen and this one, and let's go to resources down to video, and let's see. Yeah, here's the thing about conversational learning, and these are math classes, freshmen. This was a Title X program, which means a lot of kids without a lot of money, from families without a lot of money. Let me just show you this. It takes about a minute, and see what you think.
Okay, so now this is just like
then 3, x equals 3. Right?
Yeah, those
3.
You're right.
Nice.
Now you gotta plug it in.
There's 3 right here and 3 right here. Okay, but you didn't do it for this one. This one is it's okay. That's where they intersect, right? Okay, so it's gonna start at 3, right? So I plot 3. And this is 1, so do I go up 1 over 1?
Yeah. Sí, estos ya están iguales, ya están en X. Entonces vas a empezar con que.
It's y minus 2 equals what? 7 parentheses X?
Yeah. It's the same thing as
And then plus 2?
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay, what was that? Huh. Okay. Those are regular, you know, remedial math classes, freshmen, you know. Any responses to that? I mean, any thoughts about what you just saw, what worked, what did, you know?
Yeah, Larry, it looked really good. I think the problem that's a remedial class, so they're kind of all at the same ability level. It's easier to help. When you have a class where you have someone at the 1% and someone at the 99%, it's a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
Also,
Well,
at the middle school level, I think also poses a different challenge than high school a little bit also.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, we're trying to figure out how to adapt this. I'm new at this too, so we're figuring out how to adapt it. One thing I can tell you though, I had classes I taught, among other things, I created and taught a class called Conceptual Physics, which was nominally very little math, lots of concepts. It ended up being about the same kind of math as everybody else. It's just presented differently. But I had kids in there who were taking a bunch of advanced placement classes, and were taking this class, which had a lot of kids who had never done anything well in math or science, got dumped into that class. And there was a range like nobody's business. And you know, Evanston is, it's like what you're dealing with. The same kids, actually, a little later. And I can't tell you how well it worked in terms of them being in it together. The kids who got it working with the kids who didn't get it. You talk about classroom contributions. One of them is to become a teacher within your study group. And if you're nailing the test and a bunch of people aren't, when you go over a test together, you're the one who can help them understand. And then I would teach them how to teach. I would help them get better at not just giving the right answer, but asking questions about what don't you understand. The spread actually is better for this kind of work, not worse. It doesn't make it harder, it makes it easier, if anything.
I have a question about the study groups. Just how much does this rely on that? And rely might be a wrong word, but I just have a feeling that we're going to be at least partly remote. And I just wonder if they cannot be in a study group, if we can't figure out the logistics of that, how else can we structure this or base it around? Because you do mention that a lot, and I love that concept. And when we're actually back full time, I cannot wait to do it. Yeah. But I just worry about how it can be structured if study groups can't be a thing, and how we do all of these skill building without that.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought in remote learning, because we should be doing that as often as we can think of it. How does this work if we're doing it like this instead of in a classroom? Using this, you're not using Zoom. What are you guys using for remote learning?
Hangouts.
We use, Google.
Google Hangout, yeah. Do you have the ability to do what we do with breakout groups? No?
I don't know if we could do that, because we wouldn't be there to facilitate. We couldn't be able to be in each group, and I don't know that we are able to group kids and not be there.
Yeah.
I also thought though, I thought by the end of the year they had rewritten the legalities of Zoom. Yes. And you could
so I just wanted to give a quick update on that.
Yeah.
The district is getting licenses, I believe. So Google has now teamed up with Zoom. That's why it shows up in your calendar to automatically put a Zoom invite and not just Google Meet. So I believe we will have the classroom educator license, blah, blah, edition with everything. We just haven't seen it yet. I haven't either, but it is in the works.
That's excellent. So in that case, you will be able to have study groups, and they can be randomized at first and solid after.
Mandatory for them to come, and not every kid's going to show up at the same time. So I wonder, without having the mandate for them to show up to a class, how we can make sure that the study groups, stay cohesive and like the same kids, and make sure that they're really building those relationships.
Yeah. Well, that's a logistical question about the time when they connect with you. You can't put a schedule out and say, we're going to meet at 11 o'clock every day or something like that. Is that not part of the deal with the remote learning?
We can, but the thing is, like some students just won't show up. Like for instance, for spring term, my co-teacher and I, Debbie, we had probably 5 students that didn't show up to anything. And even though we contacted home and personally contacted the students, and not saying well, why didn't you show up to math? We just said, hey, we just want to make sure everything's okay with you, how are you doing and stuff like that. They never responded. So that's a problem. And then some students will just show up because they want to be social, and then they won't show up when it has to do with math. So it's kind of just it's just like a mix of who will actually show up and who won't.
Yeah, I don't know that some of that is in our control, but I do think that I'm trying to look at it from the positive. If we are actually going back to school in the beginning, I feel like if you take time to set up these study groups and really front load it with, hey, we're probably going to go remote. Here are the expectations during remote learning. Like, you're going to have these study groups, and then trying to figure out some way, and I don't have the answer, I'm just thinking out loud right now, but trying to have students hold other students accountable for showing up to these study groups, whether they get their cell phone numbers or their whatever. I don't understand how, I haven't thought about how it'd be done, but I think if you lay this foundation and really get that buy-in in the first maybe 2 or 3 months of school, then I would like to believe that it will be a little easier come remote learning time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's always going to be, there's going to be students that don't show up.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Well, it's just that. It's not even that. Like, we don't even know their home lives. There's so many variables. If they're taking care of their younger siblings, I've had that issue. I mean, it's just very, so like, it's nice that if we do have like Zoom and things like that, we could do recordings of our lessons and like, try to make it mandatory, but without like giving any penalty to it.
Yeah.
There's just so many variables, unfortunately.
If you guys start out the school year with remote learning, which is of course possible, all of this is going to become dramatically harder. To build a culture like this is much, much harder than if you're in the room together, you're doing activities together, you do all this get to know you kind of stuff in person. You can do the same things, through the computer. Students up with much better ways to do that than we can think of with social media and so forth. I think tapping into the desire to connect with each other is the key, and means going through social, or maybe going on that you don't know anything about their in school, but same kids who don't show up. That happens in real life, in real physical terms. How do you
Make you're frozen again, Larry?
Yeah, I gotcha. I don't know why that happened. Can you hear me? Okay.
But you're breaking up. You're pretty bad.
Right. I don't know why this is happening. Still breaking up or no?
Better.
Better? Okay. The issue about remote learning is it's going to make stuff harder. There's no way around that. We're all the best we can. Get them engaged with us and with each other using whatever means we can. And what I was saying before, using social media in some way, I don't know, but that's something we can think about, something they can help us with if we ask them to create more of belonging, connected to each other. These are all good questions. These are all things we got to struggle with. Others about feedback. A lot of you haven't responded yet. That's something you want to share just to get back to that topic. I'm writing this stuff down, by the way, and I'll put it together and send it to you, when we're done.
I have something about feedback.
Yes.
I feel like the way I use feedback, I sprinkle it within my curriculum. Like, I do it at the beginning when I'm checking homework, and it's a verbal feedback. We go over the work. I might go around the room throughout the class, checking on what they do. They might work with me and that sort of. Now, the reason I gave myself 3 is that I feel like my feedback, the students don't know when to look for it because I just kind of sprinkled here and there throughout class, so I know I do it. I feel like that if it's more structured, I think it would be more beneficial for them and it'd be more meaningful. Like, if I pick something that I concentrate on, they'll know, okay, this is something, if you know you're going to get feedback on, that is one of those things that you better do your best, because this is what my teacher is really going to look at. For example, if I feel like with remote learning, I really gave a lot of feedback because I didn't have that interaction with the kids, and I didn't want my high flyers to feel like, oh, I just got a grade and that's it, that I would actually make comments, positive comments. Some of my students who didn't understand it, it might just be a list of the correct answers, and I might give them more feedback besides giving the answers. So I feel like for me that I do use feedback, but because there's no rhyme or reason, I just sprinkle it everywhere, that my students aren't anticipating it. So I don't think they really make good use of it. So with this, I was thinking I need to pick something that I know I can commit to, so they know that, okay, this is, yes, I do want them to do their best, but I feel like for it to be more helpful for them, they know when to expect it. And that's something I feel that I need to work on.
Right. So for instance, you can build feedback structures into almost anything. So kids have done some homework, they get into groups, they talk about it, you got all the structure around that. They know that at the end of when they're done working together, you're going to toss out a checkup question, and they're going to find out whether everybody can answer it correctly. Their job is to make sure no matter what I throw at them, everybody can do it correctly. That's what they're there for. It gives them a purpose, it gives them a deadline, it gives them feedback. They both on, do I know this yet? Each individual person says, do I know this yet? But also, did we do a good job as a group getting us all ready? It's feedback to the group as well. And you can build those things in on a very regular basis every time they come to class with homework. For instance, another one is I would have kids come into class with their journals where all their work went. And they would get into their groups, and I would stamp in their work. If it was substantially complete, they'd get a stamp. And I somehow came up with the idea that if everybody got a stamp, they would all get a double stamp. The group would get a stamp as well as the individual. If one kid didn't do their homework, and I could see that, I'd start with the person next to them and go all the way around and get to them and say, oh no, you didn't do your homework.
Yeah.
No double stamp for you guys. And I'd walk away, and you can bet there was peer pressure on that person to do homework next time. It wasn't me nagging. It was them saying, you wrecked our chance for a double stamp, knowing that a double stamp doesn't mean anything or help them in any way. It's just a double stamp. It still is it has a profound effect on their motivation. So you can build things like that in that it has nothing to do with grades. It's entirely about, are we working well as a group? Do I understand this yet? If I don't, and you can have mini contracts, which we're going to get into, next, where you give a checkup, and that's what determines what happens in that, what each individual student is going to choose to do. They can come to anticipate that that's what's going to happen. That's what we do, on Tuesdays, or that's what we do every morning, or whatever. Let's see where we're at, and based on that, let's spread out. No, you're not going to do that every day, but that could be a regular feature as well. So I think building structural stuff in, every time they do homework, there's helpful hints. Every time they get into a group, there's an answer key. Right? Every time they take a quiz, there's going to be a discussion where they're learning from each other what they didn't get right on the quiz. It's ungraded, right? That really nice idea there. Okay, other stuff. Let's just maybe spend a few more minutes seeing if we get any more ideas about feedback.
And I was just going to add to that, even in giving student-to-student feedback, providing some question prompts or some prompts. I was thinking about the special ed lens or the other students that just are quiet or I can't think of what to ask. If you have a little card prompt, like here are some starter questions that you could ask. Here's for me, I'm like, here's the mathematical vocabulary I expect you to use when you're having these conversations, so I think that could help too.
Yeah.
Something else I've done in my classroom was kind of like a Socratic circle kind of thing, where I gave some sort of activity or some sort of thing, graded it, but didn't just left some feedback or just highlighted. And then I put the first group together strategically, so they could talk about a particular problem. And then everyone else would just be on the outside. They could ask questions coming in, and then we would rotate students out. I would ask for volunteers to rotate in and out. If I didn't have anybody, I kind of knew who I wanted to be in there to talk about the next question. And then, you know, if some of the kids that didn't want to go on the inside, as long as they were contributing by writing down questions, and then I could ask them out loud. And I honestly, the first time I did it, thought the kids hated it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. Because I kind of felt like I was pulling kids in and there wasn't a lot of volunteering. And then the next day they came in with their assignment and they asked if we were going to do it again, and they all really liked it. And I wish it was something that I did more often, but it did take it does take a lot of time. You know, it's one assignment that they have to do, and then they come in and they have this big discussion about it. So it's 2 days on one assignment. So sometimes it did feel hard to fit in. But the kids did really seem to like it, even though it didn't show on their face while it was happening. Another good way for that. Like, I just stepped out and they were all just talking about the problems, trying to figure it out, making their corrections and all that. It was kind of really amazing.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I was going to add also to that to say that when we do like open response tests in the K-5 space, when we do that, we set up an environment how to talk about and critique another person's work, because they don't know how to do that. And I think it's helpful to have like a class list or come up with that together and reference it constantly. And we found that we have to reference it at least 4 units worth of time, like halfway through the years when it starts clicking how to do this, and then it's on autopilot and they do that. But you have to be patient with yourself, and the kids have to, you know, be patient and do that. But it does help to have something like that, because they don't know how to talk about each other's work respectfully or ask the right questions and know where to go next with that, right? So there is that. Also, I noticed something in the chat box. Dan had said participation and feedback needs to be authentic and meaningful. I just want to add to that to say also timely. This is where I feel like I struggle, and the teachers I work with struggle, because it's that timely feedback at the time that you need it, at the moment that you need it to move to the next step. Managing that with everything else that's going on in the classroom, and you're trying to do your formative assessment, you're trying to get them ready for the unit test. It's tricky, and time is critical. And if you guys have other ideas or you want to think more about that, let me know, because that I find is a constant struggle. I know I'm still working towards that. So.
All right. Okay. Well, I guess maybe let's take a minute and shift gears a little bit. We're almost ready for a break, but let's at least start this conversation, I think, about the reading you just did about learning contracts. What are your concerns? What are you excited about? What rang true? What seemed far-fetched or not appropriate for your students? Talk to me about your response to the readings.
Okay. I liked all the examples of the learning contracts. Like the gallery of the learning contracts is really nice. Like I liked the different styles and formats people had, and then just looking at it in different subject areas was helpful. One of them, I didn't like calling the one section above and beyond, because to me that kind of made me feel like it gave a I'm better than you kind of sense, and that was just maybe just me. But I think I would call it challenge or something. But I did like seeing all the different examples, because I think that in making one myself, having the examples is really useful.
Yeah, in our last meeting with the language that we used on our differentiation, were you going to like show that to the kids, that language, the medium, mild, spicy? Because I mean, you could just change it to that.
Yeah, I thought that just keep it consistent, to have it all be one thing would be helpful than rather calling it different things.
Yeah. One thing for me, at least, and you may not agree with this, obviously, because I made what I was testing a subset of the whole curriculum, our goal was to make sure everybody got the essential stuff. Anything beyond the essential stuff, that's what the above and beyond means. It's above and beyond what's essential, what we're all really trying to master. And talking at the beginning of the year, we know that some people get this faster than other people, better at sports, people get math quicker than other people. Some people are good at languages and some aren't. And we're all in this together. And some of us have strengths in this and others in that. We learn in different ways. And some of us are going to get through this faster than other people. We want to make sure that everybody masters what's important. but some people are going to get through that faster, and then they can go on and do stuff that's more than what the rest of us are going to do, and that's great. So you can frame it in such a way that it isn't judgmental. These are the bluebirds and these are the robins, you know, or these are the experts. You could also call it enrichment and get around it that way. You know, if you want to enrich your experience, do this stuff too. But like I've said in the past, I have kids in regular physics who I give an honors physics book, and on the contracts, there would be homework assignments that were above and beyond enrichment from the other book. Most of my students would never even look at that book, but some students in some contracts, in every contract, would say, yeah, I'm going to take on one or two things there. I'm going to do a really hard problem. So you have to call it, you either have to call it something that doesn't make it seem judgmental. These are better students than those students. Or you have to have a cultural agreement that we're not all going to do the same thing, and some people are going to go faster than other people. That's another possibility.
I was also thinking for those who have students that might have like different needs in executive functioning or in those aspects, because I do have that, of making like, and I have a smaller group, so it's more feasible. But also gen ed teachers, please, like, feel free to ask. I would be willing to help my friends in my gen ed classrooms, but making individual mini contracts, again, that's very student specific, and like for certain students that might have like specific goals associated with it, but it's a way to kind of say like everybody's getting like a mini contract, but like it might be more geared towards their needs. To keep it structured, because I really like, after hearing everybody and they kind of in the same boat of like, got to keep it consistent, you got to keep it authentic. And if you're using them consistently, then it really helps build that community that everybody's getting it. It just might look a little bit different. So I don't know if anybody else has any ideas on that, but like, again, special ed perspective and a small classroom environment, but like having it more tailored to like specific students' needs. So it kind of all looks uniformed in a way.
Yeah. I would agree. I thought that was kind of like the concept we were talking about, like with contracts, that they have to be like specific for kids. I kind of happened upon a contract last year when I was writing sub plans. So I was like, how are my kids going to know what they need to get done in one day? And then I just kept using it. And then I also found like a motivation at the end, like for instead of like an above and beyond, but like additional practice to like tie in some form of technology so that like other kids couldn't see what they were working on. And it was kind of like on their iPad and specific to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One thing.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go on.
I'm really excited about this chapter, just with the different charts that, you know, I love that. It makes it organized for the students. So I'm really excited about that. I just wanted to share that. But I do also want to mention, just for an example, one of them on page 114, just makes sense what I'm referring to. Whether the words you choose, you can decide. But for example, for the learning target for 1, let's say the student decides to do needs practice. I don't want them to think that they're choosing between the needs practice and above and beyond, because what I mean by that is, let's say for that Tuesday, which is scheduled, they do it then. But then by 2-3 days later, they kind of understand it. On Friday, they can actually go back. I feel that we have to kind of remind those students that you can actually go back and to the learning target and actually do that above and beyond. Mm-hmm. That if you, at the moment, if this is what your need is, go ahead. But on those independent work day, we have to remind the students, well, you know, on this day you chose the needs, and, you know, they're working at their own pace. That's what I was thinking of, that they should always have an opportunity to go back and do above and beyond of that week or the previous. I know my other students, they notice when I give challenging work and they're like, oh, can I try this? I'm like, well, why don't you do one of the examples and then show it to me, and then, yeah, we can move on. So I feel that the above and beyond does give the students a choice, but I think we also have to remind them that they can even go back to it at their own pace, a day later, 2 days, a week later. But I just want to say I'm really excited about this.
Good. Yeah.
And then, go ahead. I do. Well, if you want to make the comment, go ahead. But then I also have a question about one of the charts. Maybe you can explain.
I did want to respond to Ellie's point
Oh,
there.
go.
First of all, my wife taught Montessori, and in her school, they would write a contract for each kid. What I discovered for myself as this stuff evolved was that I wanted to have a menu of things that they could choose from and teach them to become independent enough to make good choices. It's absolutely critical with all these things that we're talking about that you make no assumptions about what kids are capable of. You have to assume they don't know how to make a good decision because they don't get to do it very often in school, that you get my point. You know, if you're dealing with special ed kids, the issue of how long does it take for them to be able to make a good choice for themselves, it might be never. You know, it might just not happen. With any class, you're going to have a range of maturity and a range of independence and a range of motivation. And what you want to do is build a culture so that everybody realizes it's really my job here to decide for myself. But you have to wean them off of their dependence on you as a teacher. We make decisions all the time for them. We have to start figuring out how to let them make decisions for themselves. And we can't assume that they know how to do it until we teach them how to do it. So
yeah, and I'm just associating it to some of, like, I'm thinking of some of the students that I have known for a couple years or a year, and like the goals that I've written specifically, whether it's in a behavior plan or executive functioning or independent functioning, just something that, like, I know that they actually does work and need, just to integrate it into those mini contracts to kind of help guide them by still making choices, even though I'm helping to choose those choices that I'm putting on there. I just meant, like, in terms of if I know there's a known goal or I know this is what they need, to kind of make it look uniform, but yet individualized.
Right.
So that was all I meant.
And let them choose between two different.
Yeah, but it's more structured choices, but like geared towards what their specific needs are. Just because I do have a variety of those needs and a bunch of different categories within the executive functioning, independent functioning umbrella, that I can really see these mini contracts be a good use to keep the class structured as well as actually work towards their goals.
Yeah. And what's critically important to me here is that as you're hearing this stuff, as we're talking about this stuff, you start thinking, how does that fit into my world? How do I adapt this to what I need to do? And special ed means you have to adapt it in a whole different way than somebody who's teaching something else, you know? So all of us have the obligation to spend the time to try to tweak the things so it fits into the kids that I have, the subject that I'm teaching, the age that they are, and so forth. Any other thoughts about the contracts and your response to them? Or
yeah, this got me thinking about like trying to make contracts more individualized per student, but like in a gen ed classroom where that may be a lot of work. Incorporating like a math menu where I think somebody mentioned that, where they're like easier problems are less points, and then like harder problems are worth more points. And students are looking to get a certain number of points like at the end. So they have to pick their problems so that they have to like earn a certain number of points by the end. And then I feel like you can individualize that by like changing the number of points that each student gets. So they can choose to do 3 5-point problems, which are 3 hard problems, or like 7 2-point problems, whatever. And those are easier problems. But I feel like it could be differentiated in an easier way, because you can just say, okay, this student, you need to get 10 points, you need to get 20 points. And it kind of challenges kids in different ways.
So I'm going to give you a homework assignment right now for Jacqueline. For next week, you guys are going to create your own contract for your students. That's the homework for next week. And Jacqueline, what I want you to do is to do exactly what you just said without points.
Yeah, I know. I've done that before.
Okay.
It's more like of a yes, no. Did you like?
Yeah,
you know?
or juggling, you know, how do you get them to choose to do harder stuff or more of the easier stuff? I was talking to Jacqueline, not Jacqueline.
Sorry, but two Jacquelines.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes,
I'm sorry. I
okay.
didn't look at your name.
Yeah, sorry. Oops. I didn't realize that until I just saw both your names at the same time. So that would be an interesting concept, is to try to figure out how to get them to juggle. Now, I know there's a math problem built into this. You need to get to a certain number of points. How do you, 3x plus 2y equals 14. But the danger there is the externalization of why they're doing it. So the question is, how can you do this so that they are internally motivated to choose harder stuff if they're ready to do it and easier stuff if they're not? Like maybe they need a checkup to make that decision. Maybe they don't know whether to jump into the deep end of the pool. So you need to give them feedback so they know, I better work on some easy ones first. So I'm just saying, keep that in mind. We're going to have a bunch of time at the end of the day today to talk to each other about how to write our own contracts for next week. You have a job now, okay? So I'm noticing it's after 2 o'clock. I think maybe we should take a 10-minute break. So I've got 2:08. How about we reconvene at 2:18? I'm going to stick around for a while if anybody wants to talk. And otherwise, take a break. And I'll see you in a bit.
Larry, I did have a question about one of the learning contracts. So on page 115.
I got it.
Okay, right all down the bottom where it says final grade. Unless I missed it, I do apologize. So I know earlier you mentioned the students get to assess themselves.
Right.
But on this one, the mini contract, I don't notice points, whether there is points or not. How would you explain the final grade? What would the students give themselves? The teacher and the process and the mastery.
Right. Well, I'm not sure. Let me think about this, Ricardo. So this is a history teacher.
Yeah.
And he combined, I don't actually recommend this, but he found it worked for him. I would separate out the process, what are you doing to learn this, from the assessment, which is how well do you understand it. Okay. He lumped those two things together.
Yes.
And those two things together would end up combining to form a grade for that unit.
Okay, that's where I got confused. I was thinking the same way as you did. I'm like, I don't know how he did it.
Now he's going to need on a separate piece of paper to give them a guideline for how to evaluate themselves. It's 40% of that and 40% of that and 20% of that. We're going to talk about that in the second to the last week about grades.
Okay.
And how you can give them all the feedback they need so that and teach them how to make good choices and how to accurately assess how well did I do this? How well did I master it? So this isn't sufficient, this piece of paper. They would need a lot of background and they'd have to be led to the point of being able to do this. So,
Larry, what conference are you guys talking about? I was trying to follow along.
Amanda,
what page number you guys were looking at?
115.
Thank you.
Is the very bottom the final grade where it says student, teacher, process, and mastery?
Thanks, guys. I was following along with your conversation. I was trying to look at what you guys were.
Yeah, oops. Yeah, we'll find out when we talk about grades. The way that I did it was I had a bucket that was about the process of learning. How well did you do this process? Did you do the work on time? Did you contribute to another part is assessment, tests, quizzes, whatever, that you're showing me that you mastered this. And then a third category that's smaller is personal outcomes. How well did you do the role of being a student, being part of this group, collaborating, challenging yourself and so forth. We'll talk about all that stuff later on, but he's putting all that stuff together into one thing. So for one unit, they'd have a grade for process and a grade for mastery. They'd have an overall grade for the unit, and then he would give a grade and see how those two things compare.
Oh, okay.
And then if there's a difference, you talk about the difference. Yeah, we'll get into that in much more detail later on.
Thank you.
Question.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi. About contracts, you give us one each time we meet. And I know some of them in here, it looks like that might be the case too. And then others look like it's an entire unit. In your experience, I guess, does one work better than the other? I don't know.
Yeah, you're not going to do much reading about unit contracts. So I call them mini contracts for something that lasts from 20 minutes to a day or two of activity versus unit contracts, which are 2 weeks or 3 weeks worth of work. Everything that you're going to do is in a unit contract. There's a whole chapter just on unit contracts.
I guess what I meant was like not really a whole unit, but like my math unit has 4 chunks and each chunk would take about a week. So I guess I meant that. So like that one little chunk, would I make like a whole contract for that chunk and then we end at the quiz or the checkup, or do I do one each day or each 1 to 2 days?
You do one, they serve different purposes. One purpose is to simply document all the work that they can do. Or even if they're all doing the same thing, all the work that they are doing. And you want them to check boxes to say, I did that, I did that, I did that, okay? How you're going to approach this first year depends on how, first of all, how much support you've got from other people who are working on it too. If you're by yourself, you're not going to take on as much. You're not going to jump as deep. You might only do that when you know they're going to spread out. Some kids are going to have to practice. Some kids don't need to practice anymore. They need to do something else or they'll be bored. So you can do, and I recommend, especially if you're doing this by yourself, you can do a mini contract only when you're going to differentiate. That it's the tool for differentiation. Ultimately, a unit contract serves that purpose. It serves as a record of all the work they've done. It compiles all the self-evaluations they've done so that you can come up with a grade for the unit. They can come up with their own grade for how they did on this unit, and you can see whether you agree with them or not. It can serve multiple purposes if you're doing the whole contract, but you do not start that way. It's just way, way, way too much work. So you can start, depending on how much support you've got, with only pay attention to when you need to differentiate. Some kids are getting bored, some kids are lost. Now what do I do? And then you spread out. And you can do that on the fly. I mean, you can just say, here's a question. If you got it right, do number 14 in the textbook. If you got it wrong, do numbers 10 and 11 in the textbook or something. I'm making that up. But especially if you can anticipate when you have to differentiate, then you can create a little tiny mini contract for just that moment. It could just be for part of the period today or all day today or today and tomorrow. And then you're done. Is that answering your question?
Yes, and more thoughts. I guess I definitely understand the need for making them on the fly, or based on something that you couldn't plan for.
Right.
But I was kind of, when I was making mine that I'm planning for, I was kind of thinking about blending like 115 and 116 together to do like everything you need to do if you need more practice, and then here's a challenge. Something like that. So instead of giving them something daily, on this day when we're going over this, here are your choices.
Yeah. So Amanda, let me just say one thing about that. That's a good format, and especially if you're doing it by Learning Goal or QWT. I'm not sure what that's about, but that's a lot of work. and it's not as easy to understand. If you just look at it and you look at the one that I gave you, our contracts, mine are simpler. The less verbiage, the less visual complication, the better. You want them to be able to see very clearly, here's what we all have to do, here's what you can choose to do. And you can put it in this format, but it's going to be a lot harder for you. And it won't be, I don't think, it depends on your kids, but I don't think it'll be as effective for all your kids if it's not simpler than that. Keeping it simple is really important.
For sure. I've done standards-based grading now for 5 years, and every year I tweak it. And I definitely started with like so much, and it's definitely. So yes, I'll keep that into consideration. My children are having a meltdown right now, so I'm gonna go.
I hear you. Go do it. You got work to do. I'll see you in a bit.
Hey, Larry.
Hello. Hang on just a second.
Okay.
I got to get organized. Well, we should get started. I guess we're missing 7 people. Oh, okay. Let's give them another minute. Well, I have a confession to make. I'm no good at multitasking, and this whole idea of reading chats while we're talking to each other, I don't think I can do that. So I'm glad you guys are talking to each other. That's terrific. But for me, it's not going to happen until, you know, it's never going to happen. So let me just see. 1 second here. What the heck? I'm having a little difficulty here. Phew, okay. Sorry about this. I got lost in my computer. Okay. What I'd like to do next is give you a chance to talk to each other about the homework for today, in particular, the reframing the student work so it becomes metacognitive in nature. And before we do that, I just want to spend 1 minute talking to you about an idea called isolating the difficulty. One of the things that gets to be a barrier for a lot of kids, and especially kids who are in a fixed mindset, I can't do that. I'm no good at math. Is that when there's a specific problem, if there are 8 sub-skills that go into solving a problem and they don't know how to do one of them, they say, I don't know how to do this. I'm done. They check out. So one of the fundamental skills that we're trying to teach them is how to isolate the difficulty. There are a bunch of things, I know how to do some of them, but what don't I know how to do? It's like if you're learning to play the piano and there's one phrase that you keep misfingering, you practice that one over and over again, and then you can play the whole piece. You don't say, I hate the piano, I don't know how to play it. You practice the thing you don't know. And so our job is to teach them, first of all, the metacognitive skill of isolating that difficulty in the whole package. And the other is to provide the scaffolding so that if they discover I'm no good at this thing, there's something there for them to practice just that thing. Not everything, not the whole thing, but just that sub-skill. So that means when you're creating a structure where they're learning to become metacognitive, like you shift the format of the homework you're giving them, part of the task, if it's possible to do it, is to get them to practice isolating the difficulty. So for instance, in my reading notes kind of homework, they would write a 5 or a 4 or a 3, depending on their level of understanding the material. If it wasn't a 5, they had to say what it is they didn't understand. That's zeroing in on the thing I don't know. If it's problems, a problem-solving skill, you need to ask yourself, are there a regular sequence of steps that I expect them to do to get to a solution? Are there distinct sub-skills that go into this big skill? In which case, can I structure the work so that they actually solve out? Like for instance, when I had kids do problems, the physics story problems, I would have them go through the same steps every time. List the givens and the unknown. Write the equation that ties together. Use that equation for the thing you don't know. Substitute in a variable. Solve the problem. 5 steps. They would do it with every problem set. Uh-oh, my internet connection is unstable. What? They would do those 5 steps for every problem they did in homework. They spell them out in steps. And when they took a test, all 5 steps are equally valuable. Being able to list the given unknown as the right answer. So now your task is to say, and it's going to be different for different topics, different kinds of problems. If there is a system that you've got, a series of steps that you've got that lead to a solution, you need to be explicit with them. Here's how you do this kind of work. And I want you to, every time you do it, to spell all those things out. Because the process is more important than the answer. That's another huge lesson. And if you learn just the process, even if you don't have any idea how now. I used to say it's like driving a car at night. The process are the headlights. You can't see where you're going, but if you got your headlights on, you at least won't crash, and you can keep driving down the road. So your job, as we're talking about creating metacognitive homework or student work, is to also decide, are there steps that I need to get them to become cognizant of, and so that they can identify which sub-skill I don't know at this point, so they can make choices about what they need to continue to practice. So I just wanted to get that out there. The helpful hints thing is a perfect example. When you turn it over, did you know how to set up the first thing? Did you know how to choose the right equation? Did you give them those things? When they turn it over and say, you know, I couldn't pick that equation, then they need to practice picking the equation. Okay. So, how many of you did the 3A, the thing about the metacognitive homework? Show of hands. Oh, great. Okay. Is anybody willing to throw their thing up on the screen and talk us through it, and then we can critique it publicly as a group to practice the skill of critiquing as a group? Because if anybody's willing to do that, it might be worth, you know, doing that collectively. If not, we can go straight to breakout groups and do it in small groups. Anybody interested in, okay, Tawana, can you throw yours up on the screen, share your screen? You're gonna have to turn your your audio on. Yeah.
Okay, let me open up the document. Give me just a second.
Okay. So while she's doing that, let's just really quickly remember the critiquing is seeing it from a different set of eyes. And in this case, let's imagine we are a sixth grader who doesn't do well in school, who struggles with math, who's seeing this piece of paper for the first time and giving our reactions so that Tawana can adjust it so it speaks to their needs.
Do you want me to delete your feedback from here? Do you want me to like check it, like to exit out so that people can't see your feedback, or do you want me to leave it on there?
Leave it on. I mean.
Okay, cool. All right, so now.
Forgot about that.
Okay, screen share. And of course, I don't see what I was looking at. Oh, here it goes. Okay. Okay. So here is the first, here's the first student template. And then I don't know how to show them like side by side, but basically just to kind of paint a picture, I was showing one, so there's two templates that I'm gonna share. One that does not promote metacognitive learning, and then one that does. So I'll show the one that does not first. And then it's page 11 through 15. All right, so it's pages 11 through 15. So this was kind of like the lesson breakdown, but I won't like keep it on that screen. I'll just kind of show. So this is like, these are some of the problems that students would be working through. So this is the template.
Are all of you familiar with the use of the colored bars there? Is that a common technique, or do you need to explain that, Tawana?
So these are algebra tiles that are a part of the lesson. And so students are getting some practice with like operations with integers and canceling out and the additive zero property. And so this is kind of like a run through, but if I don't want to like be too time consuming, but
Right.
if you look, okay, so I don't know if there's critiques that people want to start throwing out for this one, and then I can go to the, or do you guys want me to show the other, like the example that does facilitate metacognitive, and then you guys just compare like what you saw between the two? Does that?
Yeah. So this one, they just do it, and then they're done.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see the other one.
Okay, and then the other one. So I wish there was a way to like put them up side by side.
We're gonna have to wing this.
Yeah, wing it. All right, and then okay, and then here's the other example. Okay, so that's the first page, and then there's one more page to it, or two more pages. So there's that, and then there's that.
So can you explain, so you have an equation in the upper left, you have the tile model. Is that, how is that?
It looks to me like a worksheet.
So you have to fill in all the pieces that are not there. Is that right? So
right.
First one, you have an equation, then you have to do the tile model, then you have to describe it.
So I don't know if this makes like, so I made a Venn diagram of like how one teaching tool, how one student graphic organizer is more so just like based off of, like it was kind of rushed through just now because it wasn't prepared like with the purpose of, you know, like group presentation. But in the first one, there's a lot where there's just the teacher like explaining. If you look at step 11, the teacher's explaining, the teacher's modeling. So it's a lot of just curriculum transfer model. And then by the time the students are actually practicing, it's just very straightforward. It's just like, can you model it? And then there's even one part in here where the teacher lesson plans, it says, students are expected to make sure their work is identical to the teacher notes. So it's very like rote, and it's very like, I want your work to look exactly like my work as the teacher. And so I didn't really feel like this was like something, and of course, teachers could put their own touch to it and you could make it more student centered. But I feel like as the way that it's presented, like if there were no changes made to this document and you facilitate it based off of the lesson notes, it's not really geared towards facilitating student metacognition. But like if you look at this one, even if you didn't really make any tweaks to it. So I know that Larry suggested that like an additional column be added in so students could actually like self-assess and like specifically like isolate the difficulties and name like, you know, where their learning is. I feel like this model, it encompasses like the multiple intelligences because you have like the algebraic approach for like the, you know, for the logistical person, you have the written for the linguistic learner, and then you also have the application of procedural knowledge. You also incorporate like kinesthetic learning, like through the tactile approach with the models. And so you're incorporating like a lot of different models. And then I feel like this column right here really does allow the learner to like isolate the difficulty, because if you're not able to explain certain steps, that right there in itself is allowing you to say like, I'm not really sure how to put into words. And so I feel like this kind of facilitates that metacognitive learning in comparison to the other graphic organizer.
And so the written description of procedure is different for, it's a sequence of how you do the order of operations backwards, basically, right? So yeah, my recommendation was for them to be able, I mean, there'll be a blank box here if they don't get it, right?
Right.
But you could dive in even more and say, why is that box blank? What is it that you didn't understand specifically? The issue is how specifically can they see what they don't know? And the way I would describe this to my students is every bit of learning that we do as human beings, there's stuff that we do know. There are all kinds of neural connections that link together ideas that we do know. And then there's this whole range of things we don't know in the world. And where we learn is how we connect what we don't know into the network of what we do know. And that means if you can shine the light on that boundary between what you know and what you don't know as specifically as possible, then you can grow more rapidly. You can learn more rapidly.
I wonder if you allow, and if you modeled this as a teacher, when you presented it, if one of the choices was if you weren't sure, like let's say you don't know how to write the steps, because that's obviously where lots of the kids fumble, that they have to write a question as to like, what is it that they didn't understand? So when they enter a group, they at least have a start off question like, I wasn't quite sure how to write the first step or something like that. So they at least had something to contribute, and then they're self-evaluating. They have to come up with the question if they don't know how to do the box.
Yeah, here's the other thing. Do you feel like they should all know how to do all 4 of these different ways of expressing themselves, Tawana? Should they be able to fill in all 4 boxes for each problem?
You know what? So that's the thing. I feel like self-directed learning is differentiation. And for me personally, I think that the antiquated approach to schooling is expecting for there to be like the same finish line for all students. But like in all honesty, I think that students don't start at the same space, and so why are they expected to end at the same space? And I don't think that means lowering the bar by any means. I just think that means like honoring like each student and who they show up as, in your classroom. And so I think when we have this mode of thinking, like, because I even struggle with like the whole notion of like, I know that somebody earlier had made the comment about like certain classroom settings being homogenous and some are heterogeneous, and kind of like alluding to it being easier to differentiate in certain settings. But truth be told, like having taught like accelerated classes in both Evanston and in another district that was like in the bottom 5% of the state. And I've taught gifted classes in both areas, and in both settings, you don't have like a level playing field of learners. There's still a lot of difference and variation even within those settings. And so I understand like the gist behind that thought, but I think that's the thought that we have to dismantle, because if we still carry out our practices based on that belief system that certain kids can't do a lot of things, or it's harder to create this autonomy in classrooms where kids are at varying levels. Well, I mean, I feel like that kind of like serves as the support beam to reestablishing like the racist system that we're trying to break apart by detracting. And so I think that it's important to know that all of our students do not have to have the same endpoint. And I think that flexibility is really important. And I've seen that, like I said, like I like refer to Tyla a lot because I get like a lot of her kids each year, and like Mr. Kim and some of the other 7th grade teachers, I get their kids and I hear about like some of the things that they do where they have the bar is very high for all of their students, but the way that students meet that bar, it looks different for different students. And I think that's the important piece. Is you may have some students that fill in all 4 columns. You may have some that fill in 3, but we have to be okay with the growth. We still keep pushing the kids to still keep striving.
Right.
The one thing that I was thinking is that a nice thing to do would be like maybe to have the kids circle which they're best at doing, and then they can help people who are struggling in that area. Like if I'm really good at the tile model, maybe I can help other kids that are struggling in that and be like almost like the advisor. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, a friend of mine called it the resident expert.
Yeah.
Very resident expert in the tile model. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that
clarifier, yeah.
Change.
Would you call it the resident who?
Resident expert.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. The other thing about this is if there are 4 ways to express something, and one of them is really important, like being able to write the equation, if you have something else, you can practice just one of these things, one of these skills, one of these columns, and have a bunch of problems where, let's say, all you do is go from the equation to the tile model. If somebody identifies, I'm really struggling with the tiles, and it's important for them to know the tiles, then give them a worksheet that's just tiles. Don't do all that other stuff, just do the tiles and practice the thing you don't do well, that you need to learn. Does that make sense? And having another column, a fifth column, which is a critique, a self-critique of what they got. It could be all up arrows. I got every bit of this. I'm good. If it's a sideways, is there a description of which column did I struggle with and why? So they're zeroing in on what they don't know. Yeah? Okay, I want to give you guys time to, thank you, Tawana. I want to give you guys time to talk to each other. I did send a file out to all of you, discussion 3.1. Did everybody get that? Anybody not get 3.1? Then what I'd like to do is put you in breakout groups. We are now 16, 17, 17 people. I think I'll put you in 4 groups. And let's take the next, let's say 25 minutes or so, talk to each other, and longer if we need it. I mean, you know, we got time here. Let's reconvene, let's see, 25, let's reconvene at, say, 3:15. And in the meantime, help each other get your metacognitive work refined. One of the things on the contract for next week is refining homework 3A. You can choose to spend your time between now and then making that thing just what you need when you walk into school in the fall. Okay.